Ladies and gentlemen, we'd ask you to please begin to take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please begin to take your seats at this time. Our program will begin momentarily. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats at this time. Our program will begin momentarily. Thank you.
All right, let's bring 12 hot.
Chivac Dance Group is an Anchorage, Alaska-based dance group. They are originally from Chivac, Alaska. The Chivac dancers are all Chupiks of the Kishu-Namut tribe in southwest Alaska in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region.
My people, I am looking for you. This song is dedicated to our grandparents and our ancestors that have gone before us. And we dedicate this to all of your grandparents and ancestors as well. It's composed by my great-grandfather, and it's a seal hunting song, so we're going to take you on a seal hunting journey. Hang up on Hohalred, hang up on Hohalred, hatchep on Hohalred, kana, ya, 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 wolf, beaver, and geese, to each their own. Their family has their own style of headdress. Our men, we have our armbands and our dance pants with owl feathers, snowy owl feathers. We wear our regalia to represent who we are, to not forget where we come from, and to also remember all our family and ancestors that weren't able to dance, that weren't able to sing, but yet we are still here singing and dancing. We are very honored to fly across the country from Alaska to perform for all of you beautiful people from all over our beautiful country. Our last song we're about to sing for you is Kakahuk Tayal Ritka. Listen to my drum. Kakahuk Tayal Ritka. Kakahuk Atol Ritka. Listen to me sing. So this is our last song that we will be performing for you guys. You guys are an amazing, amazing audience, and we hope to see you guys in the future. Yo
will now take a short break. Please stay in your seats.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Mic check. Test 1 2. Testing the podium microphones. Test 1 2. Can I get a thumbs up when we're good to go? Test 1 2. Test. Test. Can we get a little more in the house? Test. Mic check. 1 2. Test. Testing the podium microphone. Good to go? In the back, thumbs up. Test. Are you good to go? Yes? Test 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Testing the podium microphone. Test 1 2. A little more. Test, test, 1, 2. Mic check, 1, 2. Testing the podium microphone. Test, test, 1, 2. Test, test, 1, 2. I think you need to come down a little. Test, test, 1, 2. Testing, testing. Test, test, test. Thank you. Yes, so he's running behind. Got it, so I'm gonna go. So you're gonna go.
Please welcome U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai.
Can
All right. It's great to be here with all of you. Good afternoon. I wanted to, on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, underscore how important our engagement with tribal and indigenous communities is, especially as we continue to shape more inclusive and fairer trade policies. As the United States Trade Representative, it is important to note for all of you how often I reflect on the fact that a people of traders at the water's edge was the meaning of the name of the original inhabitants of the land on which we are assembled for today's summit. Our nation's story on trade begins with all of you and your communities. Your ancestors were our first traders. From pelts to food and so much more, trade among tribes was vibrant and flourishing here well before the arrival of European colonizers. It was a sustaining, driving way of life. This legacy is particularly significant for our approach to U.S. trade policy under President Biden and Vice President Harris. Now, for the first time in our agency's history, we at USTR are actively and intentionally working to ensure that the dignity, priorities, and well-being of the world's first and original traders are reflected as we craft a news story here on trade and investment policy. We know that our economy is more than just numbers, even though oftentimes it feels like when we talk about our economy, it's just a bunch of numbers. Our economy is actually made up of people, and that is why we need to make sure that our economy works for our people. Not only for those that know the ins and outs of trade policy making and Washington, D.C., but especially for those that have been traditionally not heard or seen. And this is at the heart of how we are building our economy, as the president says, from the middle out and from the bottom up, and ensuring that more people across our society get their fair share of the economic pie that we are all making. I am proud to say that the president's trade policy agenda and annual report now include unprecedented objectives and updates on engaging with tribal nations, tribal colleges and universities, Native and Indigenous community-based organizations, academia, entrepreneurs, and enterprises. Not only must you claim your rightful seat at the table, your voices must help shape our work. And that is why at my agency, USTR, we have made it a priority to hear directly from tribal nations, to meet you where you are, to hear your concerns, and to learn from you. One of the first actions that I took after being confirmed as U.S. Trade Representative was to host tribal consultations with tribal leaders in what many believe were the first ever in USTR's 60-year history. They are now an annual standard. And this is really important because our approach to trade is grounded in equity, fairness, and respect. If done right, trade can be a force for good to empower working families and underserved communities. In our tribal consultation meetings and discussions, we have learned so much from you. We are reminded of the importance of acknowledging and resurrecting traditional trade practices and economies and the challenges of operating in today's global economy. So our way of honoring this rich history is to put you front and center of our trade policymaking. We sought and appointed Indigenous experts to serve as cleared advisors on our trade advisory committees. This is a first step to better inform our approach when we engage with other economies, including in the Indo-Pacific, the Western Hemisphere, and Africa. As a hallmark moment for our host year for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, meetings in San Francisco last month, I was deeply honored to convene the first ever minister-level dialogue with Indigenous leaders. And I was very honored that Chief Malerba, who's sitting in the front row here, was a part of that convening and could speak directly to my trade minister counterparts from Asia. I also want to note that the minister statement from APEC this year includes specific mentions of Indigenous peoples as an important part of realizing equitable economic growth, which it turns out isn't just a goal for us, but is a goal of other countries and economies as well. We are also continuing to work with the U.S. International Trade Commission to better understand how trade policies and trade might impact our tribal communities and Native and Indigenous workers. The USITC's investigation revealed, first of all, that we need better and more disaggregated data and research. So we are partnering with our interagency colleagues across the administration to change that and to improve that. Influenced by your voices, USTR is also working with colleagues across the US government to explore how trade tools and trade rules may better address issues like misappropriation of Indigenous goods and capacity building for Native entrepreneurs and workers. I would also like to note that the United States greatly appreciates the work that is happening among partners of the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement, or the IPETCA. Thanks to your guidance to us at USTR, the United States announced that we are actively and eagerly exploring becoming an observer to that agreement. Our entire administration is fully committed to using trade as a force for good for Indigenous workers everywhere. And just as Native heritage and culture are foundational to our nation's identity and fabric, we are committed to lifting up Native voices as foundational pillars of our work going forward. It is an honor to be here with you today. I look forward to getting to know more and more of you and to continuing to build our work together. Thank you so much for your partnership.
Please welcome to the stage Director of the Office of Personnel Management, Neera, and Deputy of Veteran and Department of Veterans Affairs Deputy Assistant Secretary Zanetta Adams.
How's everyone doing? I know we're coming right before the prime time, so make sure to get out of your way really quickly. It's very wonderful to be here. As the voice of God mentioned, I'm Neera. I am the director of the Office of Personnel Management. So you have to think about the Office of Personnel Management in OPM as like the human resources wing for the federal government, which happens to be the largest employer in this country. Our mission is to recruit, retain, and honor the federal workforce, and to be a model employer, an example for employers across the country. We are here today because of our commitment to tribal nations and ensuring your voice in federal decision-making. So I'm not going to be talking necessarily about federal jobs, though I'm happy to do that at some other point. I'm going to talk about another role that we have here at OPM, which is really facilitating an important effort that is underway within the federal government. And that is tribal consultation. I am speaking to those who know so much more than I do. And that is the fact that tribal consultation is a cornerstone of honoring our relationship and upholding sovereignty and self-determination. We know that effective consultation requires genuine engagement, continuous dialogue, and in utilizing established best practices. So I think what has been, unfortunately, the environment of late is that consultation has been left to a few agencies to do very well, and not for all of us to really understand our role and our responsibility. All agencies must be equipped to lead effective consultation. And as you know, last year, the president signed a memorandum establishing uniform standards for tribal consultation and directed my agency and Department of Interior to help build a tribal consultation training for all 2.2 million federal employees. Just a small group of people, that's all. So I'm pleased to announce some important steps that we're making forward in this effort that I want to share with you today. So the Office of Personnel Management, along with the financial support of the Department of Veteran Affairs, and Zanetta is here with me today, I want to take a point of privilege that her boss, Secretary McDonough, gave me a personal call about this a couple of weeks ago about his level of commitment, and also the financial and significant substantive support from the Department of Interior. We are building a consultation training module for all federal employees that will focus on increasing understanding of tribal governments, best practices for consultation informed by tribes, and the legal requirements for consultation. So as a part of this effort, OPM led a formal consultation with Interior to hear recommendations on how to improve consultation government-wide and better understand issues that tribes are experiencing. Here's a couple of things that we heard from you all. We learned that for too many tribal communities, consultation is simply what you feel from us is checking the box. And at the same time, we learned that tribes are receiving a lot of requests for consultation, in part because of the President and Cabinet's commitment to tribal nations, and that requires so much of your time and expertise. So through this formal consultation on consultation, we determined that we must make consultation more efficient, effective, and less burdensome for tribes and federal agencies. In addition to tribal consultation, we know that it is equally important that the federal government, as a part of our unique trust responsibilities, understands and respects tribal, treaty, and reserved rights. In the consultation on developing this training, lack of understanding these treaty rights was the biggest issue the tribal leaders raised. That is why, alongside the consultation module, there will be a treaty and reserve rights module as well that will ensure that federal employees are made aware of treaty rights, taught how to interpret and navigate them, and that they follow a set of best practices previously put together by the White House Council on Native American Affairs. So I am actually excited to show a short preview of what this new course is going to look like, but in just a few minutes, because I am really looking forward to my colleague, Zanetta Adams, to speak with you for a few minutes. And I'll bring her up, but let me thank you for your partnership, your candor, and your feedback, and your commitment to productive and mutually beneficial relationship between the federal government and tribal nations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Ahuja, and thank you, tribal leaders, for your commitment to ensuring that members of your tribe's voices are heard. Secretary McDonough and the entire VA are committed to ensuring that Native veterans are connected to their earned benefits in a way that works for them. And we want to partner with you on the best ways to do that. The $250,000 commitment is just one of the many ways that we will continue to show up for our Native veterans. Honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations is paramount, and this new training will help fortify federal agencies' ability to consistently enter into tribal consultation with tribal nations in accordance with the presidential memorandum that was signed, as Director Ahuja mentioned, January 2021. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve veterans in a meaningful way, and thank you for your service and your continued service. I know that tribal veterans serve at a large rate, and we want to make sure that we're here to serve you. So with that said, let's cue the video.
Cue up the video,
Thank you.
wherever it is.
Okay, we're going to hold the video.
We're going to hold the video. I think there's some important other stuff happening. See ya.
Please welcome Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, Brian Newland.
All right. Ani Bujun and away Maganaduk. Minogijip. Good afternoon, tribal leaders and friends from all across Indian country. You've heard a lot this morning about the amazing progress we're seeing thanks to President Biden's leadership. Secretary Haaland said it earlier, and we've said it often, but it's worth saying again. Under President Biden, we've made unprecedented investments in Indian country of $45 billion. From day one, President Biden has acted for us. He's put tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and indigenous prosperity at the front of his agenda, and I couldn't be more inspired or proud of his leadership. The steps we've taken over the past 3 years will lay the foundation for the future to ensure that every Native person has the right to live safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives together as tribal people in their tribal homeland. So it's my honor to introduce someone who leads with the ideals that this era demands, someone who's never stopped pushing for the dreams and ambitions of Indigenous people, the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Please have a seat. And thanks for all the tribal leaders here. I want to say how much I appreciate your efforts of being here. You know, we're grateful you made the journey to have, we have an important conversation to have about things that matter most to your people. That's why we're here. It's a simple proposition. When I became president, I promised my administration would prioritize respect for tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Otherwise, Danny Inouye would come down from heaven and beat me up. I was raised by Danny Inouye. You think I'm joking? I remember once I said, all those Indian nations. She said, no, nations, Joe, nations, nations. And that was 50 years ago. You know, that we usher in a new era of relationship between our government and nation-to-nation relationships. We've made progress, but we know Indigenous communities still live in the shadows of the failed policies of the past. That's why I committed to working with you to write a new and better chapter in American history for Indian nations. To honor the solemn promise the United States made to tribal nations to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations and to work together to rebuild tribal economies and institutions. To make this new era, well, you should be clapping. This is the first time this has happened. Come on, guys. You may not be proud of all this, but I'm really proud of it. Make this new era of self-determination a reality. On my watch, the federal government has made record investments in tribal nations. There's more to do. The American Rescue Plan, the largest direct federal investment in tribal nations ever. We helped vaccinate tribal communities. We got the economy going again. And the bipartisan infrastructure, the single biggest investment in tribal roads, bridges, water, high-speed internet, electricity, integration, environmental cleanup, and so much more, because you deserve it. It's long overdue. The Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in fighting climate change ever, anywhere in the history of the world, and helping tribal communities to lead in the transition to clean energy and ease the impact of droughts and wildfires and rising sea levels that threaten native lives and precious homelands. You know, at the same time, my administration last year secured the first ever advanced funding for Indian health services. $5.1 billion locked in before budget negotiations so hospitals could plan ahead, order supplies, hire doctors, knowing the money would be there. And we're going to keep fighting to make sure that funding is a mandatory part of the federal budget, so tribes can count on it year in and year out. Folks, these transformational investments are going to help tribes, but they help all Americans, all Americans. We know the federal dollars are vital to your communities in order to be able to thrive. We know you know best how to invest them, not us. You know. You know what your communities need, and that's what self-determination means. But today, there are still too many hoops to jump through, too many strings attached, and too many inefficiencies in the process. For example, a small tribe may qualify for federal funding, but they can't afford to hire an extra staff needed to complete all the paperwork. Or a tribal council may secure a grant, but can't collect it without raising enough cash to meet the federal matching requirements. Or a remote Alaskan village may receive funds without roads or internet and has to charter a plane or every quarter just to be required to be in compliance with the report. Folks, we can do a hell of a lot better than that. A hell of a lot better than that. And we're going to. That's why today I'm signing an executive order to reform the federal funding system for tribes, cutting that red tape so you can deliver for your community faster and better. And here's what that order does. It requires federal agencies to streamline grant applications, to co-manage federal programs, to eliminate heavy-handed reporting requirements that gives tribes more autonomy to make your own decisions. Not to mention, it's more efficient. We know this approach works because we're doing it in some programs already, and we've been doing it for some programs for nearly 50 years. Take the Indian Health Service. More than half its budget now goes directly to tribes to run their own clinics and hospitals rather than relying on federal facilities. That's a source of local pride, deliver quality care tailored directly for each community because communities are different. Today's executive order also creates an online clearinghouse, a one-stop shop where tribal governments can more easily search for grants and all in one place. And that to me, by the way, not only tribes, but every state's asking for the same thing. And the order also task the Office of Management and Budget and my Domestic Policy Council with identifying areas where our funding falls short and ways to meet these needs going forward. Folks, separately, we're also streamlining the Buy Indian Act so federal agencies get more goals and services, goods and services from Native-owned businesses. Native-owned businesses. This year, for example, the Indian Affairs Bureau awarded 75% of its budget to Native-owned enterprises, up from about half that in 2021. Together, these steps are going to help grow tribal economies and reduce the hoops they have to jump through to get the funding they deserve. It's all part of my vision for a new era of respect. Respect for you as leaders, respect for tribal sovereignty, respect for the nation's fundamental right to build a future and own on your own terms, not anyone else's terms. From day one, I've worked to include indigenous voices at the table in all we do. I've appointed Native Americans to lead across the federal government. Not only Secretary Haaland, America's first indigenous cabinet secretary, and I can say without exaggeration, she's doing one hell of a job. One hell of a job. But scores of other Native Americans in key roles across the administration. I've been proud to reestablish the White House Council on Native American Affairs to help coordinate that policy as well. And I'm proud to relaunch this annual summit after years of neglect by my predecessors. I was proud to take historic steps to improve consultation process between federal agencies and tribal nations. Working together, we also reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, which I wrote as a U.S. Senator, expanding tribes' sovereign jurisdiction, their sovereign jurisdiction. And I directed federal agencies to work with you to address the missing and murdered indigenous people. At the same time, preserving important and ancestral tribal lands. I restored protections for my predecessor, gutted by my predecessor, at 3 national monuments, Grand Staircase and Bears Ears. And by the way, you know how that happened? I was in a plane, and a little girl came up to me, she said, "Mr. President, can you take care of Bears Ears?" And I thought she said, "Can I take care of her ears?" I said, "What, honey?" She said, "Bears Ears, it's really important." And guess what? She was dead right, and we did take care of it. The Northeast Canyons and Seamount and the coast of New England I used my authority under the Antiquities Act to designate new national monuments as well, including Castor Range in Texas, Camp Hale in Colorado, Spirit Mountain in Nevada, ancestral footprints in the Grand Canyon, which, by the way, I enjoyed doing that at the last one. Anyway, it got some attention from people who didn't agree with me. But anyway, meanwhile, my Department of Agriculture and Interior have signed more than 200 agreements to strengthen co-stewardship of federal lands, recognizing the value of tribal knowledge. And today, we're publishing the best practices guide to help federal agencies work with tribes to protect sacred sites in all these areas. Folks, at the same time, we're helping to preserve cultural heritage like tribal languages and sports. Sports like lacrosse. Joining us today are members of the Six Nation Confederacy, by the way, where are you guys? Stand up. Come on. Which invented lacrosse nearly 1,000 years ago. The game brought tribes together, a force for peace, friendship, and healing. The Six Nation players are still among the very best in the world. And as a point of personal privilege, I know about this because I went to Syracuse University, long the home of a powerhouse lacrosse program. And I might add, my daughter was a first-rate lacrosse player in high school, and my niece was an All-American lacrosse player at Harvard. So we have a little knowledge of lacrosse in our family. I wanted to play lacrosse, but you had to choose between lacrosse and football. You couldn't play both in the same season. Since I was a powerful 6'1", 158-pound flankerback, I was the runner-up a state scoring championship. Don't laugh, man. As they say in football, I got soft hands. It gets a lot. This fall, it was announced that lacrosse will once again be an official Olympic sport. And the Six Nations team asked to compete under its own tribal flag. And today, I'm announcing my support for that request. Their ancestors invented the game. They perfected it for a millennia. Their circumstances are unique, and they should be granted an exception to field their own team at the Olympics. Let me close with this. It's hard work to heal the wrongs of the past and change the course and move forward. But the actions we're taking today are key steps into that new era of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. A new era grounded in dignity and respect that recognizes your fundamental rights to govern and grow on your own terms. That's what this summit is all about. That's what this summit is all about. So I want to thank you all for being here, allowing me to be with you, and I look forward to continuing our work together. Now it's my honor to sign the executive order to do all the things I just said. So thank you, thank you, thank you. The tradition is when you sign an executive order, you give one of these pens to the person responsible for it, you're all going to get a pen. I only have one. But I promise you're all going to get one. Executive order reforming federal funding and support for tribal nations to better embrace our trust responsibilities, promote the next era of tribal self-determination. There you go.
We will now take a short break. Please stay in your seats.
Let's do VOG for seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats at this time.
Let's go hot on 12.
Please welcome the Secretary of the United States Department of Commerce, Gina Raimondo.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is fantastic to see all of you here. It's as I was, waiting to come out, I could feel the buzz and the energy. It's a packed audience, and it's just great. It's a great event, and huge thank you to Secretary Haaland, who's doing a phenomenal job, and thank you for hosting us all here. It's an honor for me to be here. It really is. I'm so pleased I was able to be here in person for the third Tribal Nations Summit. At the outset, I do want to acknowledge that the Commerce Department recognizes tribal sovereignty and the fundamental self-governing right of tribes. And I want you to know, and hear from me, I try to set the tone at the top, to reiterate our entire department's commitment to working with and coordinating with you, the tribal communities, to ensure you have the resources you need for economic growth. Economic growth only matters if it's equally shared. And that's what this is about. Our mission at the Commerce Department is to do just that, to create the conditions for economic growth and prosperity for all communities and for all people. And thanks to President Biden's leadership, we now have an unprecedented amount of money and resources to invest in communities all across the country, investing in infrastructure, job training, broadband, regional economies, and we are unbelievably serious throughout the government under the President's leadership, and specifically in the Commerce Department, to be intentional as we invest this money to include tribes in our design work to make sure that your needs and priorities are addressed. And that's what I want to talk about with you for a couple minutes here today, to highlight for you some of the programs specifically that the Commerce Department is running right now. So first relates to high-speed internet. I don't need to tell you, it is heartbreaking to know how many families, children, schools, businesses on tribal lands that don't have the internet. It's not okay in 2023. It's not okay. We have the resources to close the digital divide once and for all, and we at the Commerce Department are obsessed with making sure that we work with you and hear from you, so we invest this money. We have $52 billion at the Commerce Department to invest this money in partnership with you to make sure we close the digital divide once and for all. We have to date awarded about $2 billion to more than 220 tribal entities to expand high-speed internet network deployment and digital skills. And that's just the beginning. That is just the beginning. In July, we announced another $1 billion in additional funds available for that program. So that's $3 billion. Additionally, we are announcing greater funds next year to make sure that everybody is connected. And that means affordably. It's not okay to have the internet at $100 or $200 a month. That's not affordable. It's got to be reliable and affordable. Paying $200 a month for satellite that goes out when the weather's bad, that doesn't cut the mustard. What we're talking about is truly reliable and affordable. I met last year in Arizona, when it was, by the way, quite a bit warmer than it is here today. And I met with a lot of tribal leaders, and they told me how the grants will help them to transform their communities. Really moving stories that I heard from people and parents and teachers, physicians, community health organizations. And that's what this is all about. And also, it enables tribes to ensure and preserve your cultural traditions. That's number one, that's broadband. We're also focused on making transformational investments in local economies to create quality jobs, to help small businesses, and expand innovation. Frankly, and you know this, for far too long, the federal government has left tribal communities kind of on your own and left out to struggle in the face of economic challenges. And government programs offered training for jobs, but the jobs didn't materialize. Or the grants were too small. Maybe we made small dollar infrastructure grants and projects, but it wasn't enough to support and grow your economies. President Biden has told us we need to meet the moment. Not enough, jobs not materializing, infrastructure grants that are too small isn't good enough. So as a result, to meet the president's leadership demands, one thing the Commerce Department did is we created something called the Good Jobs Challenge. We put $500 million into training so people could get jobs that exist today. It's been transformative. These are large dollar grants to make sure we meet the mission. And just one example, the Lakota Funds in South Dakota, excuse me, is receiving $5 million to create a construction trades training program for residents of 9 tribal reservations. That's just one example, which I'm sharing, because what they're doing there is training people to get jobs and, in the process, addressing the shortage of housing inventory that exists in that area. Similarly, part of our new Go Big and Make Big investments, we at the Commerce Department established a $1 billion Build Back Better regional economic development challenge. And once again, we put the needs of tribes front and center, which we had not done. I'm going to be honest and say we hadn't done enough of that in the past, and we're trying to make up for that now. So as an example, the Mountain Plains Regional Native CDFI Coalition, led by the Four Bands Community Fund, is receiving $45 million from the Department of Commerce to grow the indigenous finance sector and expand economic opportunity in tribal communities in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So once again, we're trying to show up in a big way for tribes that need and deserve it. Within Commerce, the Economic Development Administration established a first-of-its-kind $100 million program to support tribal governments and indigenous communities. So that's all within the umbrella of the EDA. That reports up to me in the Commerce Department, Economic Development Agency. I want to just talk about one other important area, also in the Commerce Department, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is, by the way, NOAA is 40% of the Department of Commerce. You may not know that, but it's a huge piece of what we do. And we at NOAA are seeking to build climate-ready communities, especially and including your communities, to help you manage natural resources and meet the challenges of climate change. I am working so hard, and this comes straight from me, to improve our consultation and engagement with tribal communities. NOAA knows we need to do a better job. We're doing a better job. I think we've done a better job, and we will. I'm promising you continuous improvement in the way that NOAA does consultation and engagement with tribal communities. This year, for example, after extensive tribal engagement, NOAA set aside almost $400 million, a $400 million tribal set-aside from the Inflation Reduction Act funds for tribal priorities, including fish passage, fish hatcheries, and capacity building. Crucial, vital project. Yeah, thank you. This was a big investment. Habitat restoration. It matters. This has to be continuous and sustainable. You know, the fishery has to be maintained so it's there in a year and 2 and 10 and 20 and 50 years for the next generation. And so we're going to make those investments so that happens and sustain the livelihoods of tribal communities all along our coasts. NOAA is also leveraging funds to provide additional support for tribes to conserve and restore salmon and steelhead populations and their habitats. In fact, just yesterday, we announced the availability of $106 million in funding through the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund, which will support efforts by states and tribes to protect and conserve these key fish species. So I know we have more work to do. We are committed to continuing to work, committed to get our tribal consultation and engagement right. But I want you to know we are on it, we're committed to it, and this is more money than ever that NOAA has invested in fisheries and fish habitat and climate in your communities. So, you know, every tribal leader I've ever spoken to on this topic, and I have personally spoken to many, talks about preserving a culture, preserving a way of life, and preserving it for the next generation. So it's more than just fishing for today, for you know, sustenance. It's about you know, sustainment over the long run, and that's why we take this so seriously. So, you know, we have a lot of energy for this work. We have a lot of energy to work with you. I'm the luckiest one in the federal government because I have an amazing director of the Office of Native Affairs and Economic Development, Sean, who's here. Sean Duchesne, where are you, Sean? Raise your hand. Back there. Sean's a little bit of a rock star in your community, and I'm lucky because she works for me. But you need to know this. Before we got Sean to serve as the director of the Office of Native Affairs and Economic Development, that position at the Commerce Department had been vacant for more than 10 years. Like, we weren't even trying. So when I say to you, I care about your communities, and I know your communities have been often left behind, not at the table, weren't listened to, weren't invested in, I get that. We are changing that. I've just listed here in just my department billions of dollars of investment, but I also want you to know we're committed. This is the beginning of a lot more to come. Long-term sustained changes to make investments in your communities to ensure that tribal communities, tribal businesses, and tribal workers are equipped for success and share in the economic opportunity that you so richly deserve. So thank you for having me, and thank you for your commitment, and thank you for hosting me.
The VOG for a short break.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin shortly. Please take your seats at this time.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as the program will begin momentarily.
Please welcome Chairwoman of the Bishop. Please welcome Tribal Chairwoman of the Bishop Paiute Tribe, Meryl Picard.
Manahu, Inaniane Meryl Picard, Bishop Owedinu Kimaru. Hello, everyone. My name is Meryl Picard. I'm the tribal chairwoman for the Bishop Paiute Tribe in the great state of California. I want to thank this administration and the tribal leaders of Indian country for joining us in this year's annual Tribal Nation Summit. I understand the sacrifice and commitment it takes for us as tribal leaders to be away from our families and our tribal communities. I also want to thank my own family, my community of the Bishop Paiute Tribe, and my council for supporting me to be here today. As the Vice President Harris's mother would say to her, you may be the first to do many things, but make sure you are not the last. Vice President Harris and Secretary Deb Haaland have paved the way for the next generation of female leaders like me. We thank them for breaking these barriers. It is a privilege and it's an honor to introduce our first female Vice President of the United States, a strong ally of our tribal nations, and a fellow Californian, which is the home to over 100 federally recognized tribes, as well as many other urban Indians. Please welcome the Vice President Harris.
For the introduction and for your leadership. You are part of a new generation of Native leaders, and I'm so excited for all the work we are all going to do together and continue to do together. So it is good to be with everyone here, and I thank all of the leaders who are here today and for traveling to be here to have this conversation with us and each other. And I also want to thank everyone for the partnership. Your commitment to building and our commitment together to building a strong nation-to-nation relationship is so very important. And as you know, you've heard from President Biden, we take it very seriously. And it is based on a longstanding commitment personally that I and he have had to building and strengthening these relationships. So I thank all the leaders who are here today for the partnership. As you know, Secretary Deb Haaland wanted to be here today, and I'm pleased that she's been able to join virtually. As Vice President, it has been my privilege to work closely with the Secretary. And I don't need to tell everyone here, she's an incredible leader, a courageous fighter, and a dear friend. President, yes, thank you. So President Joe Biden and I believe that the bond between our nations is sacred. And we believe that we have a duty to safeguard and strengthen these bonds, to honor tribal sovereignty, to ensure tribal self-determination, to uphold our trust and treaty obligations, and build a future where every Native person can realize their aspirations and every Native community be a place of opportunity. And in building that brighter future, we must also speak truth about the full history of the relationship between the federal government and Native tribes. A history that includes broken treaties, harmful assimilation policies, displacement, dispossession, and violence. For too long, our country did not fully acknowledge or reckon with this history. And that was particularly true on the issue of Native boarding schools. For generations, Native children were torn from their families and their communities, forced to change their names and cut their hair, forbidden to speak their language or practice their religion. In boarding schools, many Native children endured horrific physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. These acts were not only a violation of basic human rights, but also an attack on the very existence of tribal nations, a systematic attempt to erase Native culture and Native identity. President Biden and I are committed to speaking truth about these horrors and to work on healing intergenerational trauma. Under the leadership of Secretary Haaland, we have created the first official list of boarding schools that received federal support. We have identified dozens of marked and unmarked graves associated with those schools and launched an oral history project to collect the stories of the survivors, many of whom are now the elders, to create a permanent record of these abuses so they can never be denied. In addition, President Biden and I continue to defend the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA. Including in the United States Supreme Court, and we all remember June 15th. In fact, that day, I happened to be hosting a collection of United States Congress members at my home, and the reception happened to be just hours after the Supreme Court agreed with our administration to preserve the protections of ICWA. And I will never forget that day because in attendance was Congresswoman Mary Peltola, and yeah. And she and I went off to the side and shared a very special moment that day of relief, frankly, as well as celebration. And many here know from the work we have done together for years, I have firsthand experience with the importance of ICWA. As head of the San Francisco City Attorney's Division on Children and Families, I worked on many ICWA cases. And as Attorney General of California, I partnered with tribal leaders to enforce ICWA. I personally know why ICWA matters, and we will always fight to safeguard ICWA, understanding its significance to real people and its significance to acknowledging the truth about history in this country. So in our work to build a better and a brighter future, President Biden and I are also committed to bridging the deep disparities that still hold so many Native communities back, including disparities in education, economic opportunity, and healthcare. One of the ways we are doing this is through our investment in high-speed internet. Because as we all know, in the 21st century, high-speed internet is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And yet today, 1 in 3 Americans who live on tribal lands and in rural areas do not have access to high-speed internet. Across Indian country, students have to sit in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant and tribal libraries to submit their homework through Wi-Fi, which of course increases disparities in education. Young Native entrepreneurs are not able to use the internet to find new customers, which of course increases disparities in economic opportunity. And across Indian country, elders have to drive often very long distances to the healthcare center because without internet access, they cannot take advantage of telemedicine appointments in their own home. And of course, that increases disparities in healthcare. So to bridge these divides, we have committed to connecting every person in Indian country with high-speed internet. And so far, we have invested more than $1.8 billion to build internet infrastructure with more than 225 tribes, and to make sure that high-speed internet is affordable. We created a program to allow anyone who lives on tribal lands to get a $75 discount on their monthly internet bill. So far, more than 300,000 Native families have signed up. But here's my request of the leaders here. Help us sign up more. We got to get the information out. The program is called the Affordable Connectivity Program, and I'd ask everyone to help more people sign up, because what we know is that a lot of the folks who actually have taken advantage of it end up having a $0 bill every month, and it really does make a difference. And then finally, one of the most existential threats facing Native communities and all communities is, of course, the climate crisis. Earlier this year, I made a visit to the Gila River Indian community in Arizona. Hi, Chairman. It's good to see you. It was a wonderful visit. And I spoke with, you convened a group of young leaders who are doing extraordinary work, and they're leading on climate. And they were brilliant. They were brilliant, and we had conversations that, in fact, were similar to conversations that I just had this last weekend when I was in the United Arab Emirates for the COP28 Global Summit on climate, and where I represented the United States. And what the young leaders were saying is exactly what these global leaders are talking about, which is, in the face of this crisis, we must all be clear. We cannot continue to allow large corporations and short-sighted leaders to deny climate science, to delay climate justice, and to greenwash climate inaction. Lands, and in particular Native community lands, have long called home, are increasingly threatened by wildfire, drought, and sea level rise. So we must meet this moment with more action and, frankly, more ambition. And to do so, we need your help, and we need your partnership. Your tribes have served for millennia as the responsible stewards of our environment and natural resources. Our country needs your knowledge and your expertise and traditions. And at a moment in time where we are finally, on a global level, taking this seriously, we must rely on your knowledge and partnership to help us be effective and smart in the way we address this crisis. So, guided by our commitment to tribal sovereignty, President Biden and I have invested billions of dollars in Native-led climate projects to make sure Native communities then have the resources to create renewable energy, to clean up pollution, and fund resilience and adaptation. For example, at Gila River, the tribe is using the funds we provided to build a new water pipeline that will deliver clean water to thousands of people and reduce reliance on the Colorado River. So these are some of the examples of the work that we have done and have yet to do together. And I'll end then with a quick story. So I just concluded a national college tour. We named it the Fight for Our Freedoms Tour. And during that tour, I met with more than 15,000 college-aged Americans at four-year colleges and universities, and also at trade schools and community colleges, including Northern Arizona University. And at NAU, I met young leaders from their Council of Indigenous Ambassadors, which represents Native students on campus. And it truly was a moment I will cherish. In the faces of these young leaders, I saw our future. And I will tell you, as we all know, our future is bright. Our future is bright. So together, then I say, in the midst of all that we see as the crises facing the world, together, let us have faith. Let us have faith in our young leaders and their future, and therefore our collective future. And let us continue then to fight for this generation and for 7 generations to come. Thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless America. Thank you.
Remain in your seats. Short break.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking a short break at this time. Please remain in your seats. Thank you. Please welcome to the stage our panel on federal processes for conservation and habitat protection.
Tatsalach. Good afternoon. Please take your seats. So, greetings and welcome to this panel. This is a panel on federal processes for conservation and habitat protection. My name is Zach Penny, and I'm NOAA's first ever, but hopefully not last, Senior Advisor on Fisheries and Tribal Engagement. I'm a Nimiipuu tribal member from the Columbia River Basin. I'm a long ways from home. I miss home very much. But I'm going to be today's moderator and question asker for this panel, and we have about 20 minutes, so we're going to be very speedy. This panel will highlight the presidential memorandum on restoring healthy and abundant salmon, steelhead, and other native fish populations in the Columbia River Basin, the Army Corps' co-stewardship and co-management efforts, and NOAA and the Environmental Protection Agency's initiatives on protecting and restoring habitats. So in today's panel, we'll hear from our esteemed panel, federal and tribal leaders. As this panel is shorter, we won't be able to take questions, unfortunately. So to start, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our panel and just write the questions. So we have the chairman of the Nez Perce tribe, Shannon Wheeler. We have John Podesta, the senior advisor to the president for clean energy, innovation, implementation. We also have one of my bosses, the Honorable Janie Bavishi, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, and the Deputy Administrator for NOAA. We also have the Honorable Mike Connor, Assistant Secretary for the Army Corps for Civil Works. And we also, last but not least, for the Environmental Protection Agency, Deputy Administrator Janet McCabe. So let's get this conversation started. The first question is for you, Chairman Wheeler. This administration has worked hard to empower federal agencies to support tribes and to fix problems the tribes did not create. Something that you and I have probably both heard from Columbia River tribal elders, leadership in the commission, is that if you take care of the resources, like salmon, they'll take care of you. And it is our role as Indian people to help speak for those that cannot speak. Can you speak to what taking care of the resources and speaking for the salmon means to you in the context of the Columbia River Basin, and why it is so important for the U.S. government, Congress, and the non-tribal public to come together in adapting for and restoring salmon and other native fish?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Zach, and I definitely appreciate being asked to be on this panel and sit with fellow executors of the rule of law. And as we think about that and our position as tribal nations when it comes to the land, when it comes to the water, and it comes to the treaties, our inherent rights that we have to the land, or for us we call Tumalwit, it's our relationship to the land, the unwritten laws. For our sake, in our treaty, what we carried to in Article 3 of our Treaty of 1855 was this way of life, and that's our obligation to the salmon and to the other animal creatures that gave themselves to us, and then they lost their voice. And so it was up for us to pick that up and to carry that, and so our leaders of the past took that and brought that forward. So under Article 3 of the treaty, the relationship that we have, the trust relationship that we have with the federal government, we're as obligated to the government as the government is obligated to us. And so when we come together as two sovereigns in this relationship that we call obverse, it's like a coin. If you have on one side of the coin, you have the United States. On the other side, you have the Nez Perce. But we're minted of the same coin for mutual benefit. And we come together under mutual agreement so that one side doesn't burden the other side. And that's what that relationship truly is about, is that we don't want to burden the United States of America by the things that we do. And we would expect the United States not to burden us. So when it comes to salmon and the recovery of salmon and the demise of salmon currently in the state that they're facing right now with extinction looming along with the climate crisis, then We come to the United States as a friend. We come to the United States as a partner, and we say, hey, something that you're doing, that you've done to a system, to the river system, like the Columbia River System of Operation and the dams that operate on that, have declined these numbers of salmon. And so since they've declined, we're here to let you know that that's burdening us. And we're here to solve this together, just like we did in 1855, just like we're doing today. So as we look at treaty, we should look at it mutually. There should be a mutual accounting standard that the United States has that's consistent with the Nez Perce tribe. And so with that, then what that does is that enforces the rule of law, and that speaks to the Constitution of the United States of America. And when it speaks to the Constitution of the United States of America, Article 6, Clause 2, that's where our treaty sits. And so under that, the rule of law, that's what speaks to all federal agencies and that trust responsibility. So we're thankful for this administration and the work that they're doing as they continue to give this a chance, give this relationship a chance, and to change it to what it should be. There's a mutual treaty bridge here that has been eroded over the course of time. Now it's being repaired and replaced by this administration, and we're thankful for each and every one of you guys for doing your part.
Katsiaya. Thank you, Chairman. The next question is for you, Honorable Assistant Secretary Connor. Throughout the evolution of this nation, tribes have needed to adapt to infrastructure development and landscape changes with or without their consultation. And now, while we can't change history, we can work to correct past wrongs. What are some initiatives that the Army Corps has been working on to conserve, to protect, and restore habitats in partnership with tribal nations?
Great question, because it's the question that tribal leaders constantly ask me in my role overseeing the Army Corps of Engineers. So I want to pick up on the themes that Chairman Wheeler talked about: friendship, partnership, and then add in that trustee role that we have. So as a Native appointee, I very much appreciate that on January 26th of 2021, the President immediately set the tone for how we would conduct tribal policy in this country, with strong commitments to consultation, nation-to-nation relationships. And so that speaks to an expansive view of what the trust responsibility can be and should be. And that's my job to then integrate that into how the Army Corps of Engineers works with tribal nations. And that's what we're trying to do. We are embarking upon redefining, reinvigorating programs and activities that we have, and it starts with the foundation of tribal consultation. So yesterday I signed a new directive for the Army Corps to implement a new tribal consultation policy, which will hold us accountable to that regular, robust, and meaningful consultation that the President has asked us to do. And that's the foundation for a number of strong initiatives that we have to get past just consultation, just trying to do no harm, to the point where we're trying to partner up with tribal nations, advance your interests, and protect your communities the way we have other communities. And so we've got a number of initiatives in place. We did the first major Army Civil Works program, $100 million for the pueblos of Okewinge and Santa Clara, aquatic ecosystem restoration project that will really reestablish hydrologic continuity in the Rio Grande Basin, restore habitat, native plants that are critical to the cultural identities of those tribes. Major restoration effort there. Last week, I signed a new directive to expand the scope of our tribal partnership program to where we're not just doing traditional civil works activities, we're working to protect cultural and natural resources for tribes. Numerous examples. We just finished a project at the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe that is basically arresting erosion from the Missouri River of tribal lands. There's not enough tribal lands in the first place. We can't let them erode. This is going to reinvigorate a site that has new habitats and recreation activities for tribal members. I just signed an agreement a month ago with my brother, Governor Lewis, at the Gila River Indian Community. We're going to fund and work on the first phase of solar panels on their irrigation canals. This is advancing Governor Lewis's vision for a blue-green economy for the community. So we're embarking on an expansive view of our tribal partnership program, and then we will be moving forward with new activities with respect to tribal indigenous knowledge incorporation, as well as co-management activities in 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Mr. Podesta, building off of what Assistant Secretary Connor just said, how has the historic funding provided by the Inflation Reduction Act enabled federal agencies to better support tribes through conservation, restoration, and habitat protection?
Well, thanks, Zach. And let me follow up, and you've heard a little bit about it already. I want to start by reiterating what the Vice President said, which is the effects of climate change are being particularly felt on tribal lands, whether that's fires, floods, coastal erosion, heat. The disproportionate effect on tribal communities, on cultural communities, on the subsistence resources is profound. And that's why there's nearly $1 billion of funding in the Inflation Reduction Act that's dedicated to support the work on both resilience and also the ability to build out and benefit from the development of clean power and the electrification of tribal communities using the resources of the Inflation Reduction Act. Secretary Raimondo talked about coastal resilience money, the money to restore fish passageways. There's, in addition to that, substantial money at the Interior Department for tribal resilience, including $40 million for the first time ever to support community-driven relocation where the infrastructure of tribal communities has eroded so badly that literally the communities have to, with their own resources and with their own plans, be able to move to safer and more viable places. There's money for building out water supplies. There's money for the emergency drought that, again, that the Vice President mentioned that the Gila River tribes are taking advantage of. The EPA has set aside $300 million for tribes as part of their environment and climate justice grants and $150 million more for Alaskan Native tribes. USDA is making investments in rural electrification we haven't seen since the Roosevelt administration, including tribal rural co-ops. And there's money to ensure that people who have no access to electricity are able to be afforded to modern electricity through DOI's program for tribal electrification. And then finally, I would say that there's a couple of unique features of this bill. One is there's a set aside to build out solar power and wind power in low-income communities and tribal communities. That's an allocated tax credit, and there's been a 200 megawatt allocation to tribal communities themselves to build their own systems of solar and wind power. That's an annual allocation. And finally, there's a provision in the law which is really a first-time thing, which is for non-federal taxpayers, including tribes. There's a feature called direct pay, which normally businesses could take advantage of tax credits. In this context, tribal communities can build renewable energy projects, geothermal projects, wind projects, solar projects, and get essentially a check back. It's not a competitive program. If you build the project and you apply to the Treasury Department for this, you get a check back from the federal government for as much as 60% of the cost of building those projects. Very unique. We have issued a tribal guide to the IRA to give tribes access to all that information.
Thank you, Mr. Podesta. Given the time, I want to make sure we have enough time for our panelists. I really wanted to ask you about the Columbia River, but I'm going to move on to Assistant Secretary Bavishi. Given the complex history and varied federal tribal relationships across the United States, how has NOAA prioritized its efforts toward conservation, stewardship, and restoration of habitat critical to the fulfillment of federal trust and treaty responsibilities to tribes, especially in the face of a changing climate?
Thanks, Zach. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here. Given the limited time, I'm going to speak very quickly about how we're prioritizing conservation and restoration of fish populations through investments in conserving and restoring fish habitat, expanding fish hatcheries, and restoring fish passage. We're also investing in building ecological and coastal community resilience. The Secretary Raimondo mentioned earlier that NOAA announced that 15% of our IRA money for climate-ready coasts, a total of $2.6 billion, is set aside for tribal priorities. So that represents an almost $400 million investments. We've also awarded more than $100 million in bipartisan infrastructure law funding to Pacific salmon habitat restoration priorities. And as Secretary Raimondo mentioned, there's more money coming. These funds taken together represent an important down payment toward coastal resilience and restoration, as well as healthy and productive fisheries in Indian country. I'll also say that we're not just looking at the amounts of funding that we're delivering, although that's incredibly important, and we're excited that, that we've been able to deliver these historic funds, but we're looking at how we're delivering these funds, listening to comments we've heard through tribal consultation, and making adjustments in our own processes to make sure that we're helping to overcome traditional obstacles. Set-asides for tribes help reduce the competition and the need for sovereign governments to compete against NGOs, and funds for capacity building help support tribes that have less resources and are trying to advance smaller projects. I'm just going to give two very quick examples. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, NOAA provided $2 million to fund a project spearheaded by the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians to conserve the culturally and ecologically significant Cape Foulweather Headland, an icon of the Central Oregon coast. And just last month, the Upper Mattaponi tribe, Indian tribe, reacquired 853 acres of their ancestral lands in Virginia's Mattaponi River in one of the first reacquisition projects of its kind. We're excited about these, and we appreciate the urgency of this work given the climate impacts that tribes are facing. I think I will stop there, given the time.
Thank you, Janie. And the last question is for you, Deputy Administrator McCabe. Because tribes are so place-based, I've heard the saying that we don't cultivate the land cultivates us. EPA has spearheaded many efforts to protect and clean up contaminated habitats and ecosystems. What are some of the initiatives EPA has worked on to address contaminated sites, especially on tribal lands, waters, and atmosphere?
Thank you, Zach, and it's great to be here on this panel with federal colleagues and Chairman Wheeler. EPA's job is to help protect, clean up, and preserve clean air, clean water, and clean land. Nothing could be more place-based than that. And when it comes to working with our tribes, sovereign nations, we have a lot of really exciting things going on. I wanted to focus on two in particular. One is under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. As you all know, I think many of the lands that were restored to tribes during that act have been contaminated, are contaminated, and that was due to no fault of the tribes. And they present a real barrier to economic development and to full use of those resources. In May of this year, we launched the new Contaminated ANCSA Land Grant Program to Alaska Native entities to help with assessment and remediation of these contaminated parcels. And in September of this year, we announced 3 grants. 3 Alaska Native corporations received $2.5 million in an initial round of funding that will go directly to cleaning up those sites, employing local tribal people to do it, and return those lands to the sovereign nations to whom they belong. And we will have more grants that we will be announcing later this year and next year. We also, you can do amazing things with the internet, and Secretary Raimondo is going to make sure that everybody has access to that. We've launched the Contaminated ANCSA Sites Common Operating Picture and Inventory. Nothing like a good name. I'm sure there's a good acronym associated with that. This is a public dashboard that is the place where all the information related to the contaminated lands will be found. There's a story map there, and really want to recommend that you go take a look at that. Another really amazing thing that we're working on with the Navajo Nation has to do with contaminated lands there due to waste from abandoned uranium mines primarily. We worked with the Indian Health Service to develop a mobile app that allows the nation to verify the location and the status of open dump sites. We've got more than 55 open dump sites that are located on that app now, and it's going to be the place where all that information is going to be located so that people will have access to that. In addition, we're working with the Department of the Interior, the Department of Energy, and various other agencies to chart a course for addressing those abandoned uranium mines and addressing the severe and unacceptable contamination that remains on those lands here more than half a century after those mines were used to produce plutonium. So in addition, I just want to say that EPA, when we work on water quality all the time, and are very excited, especially some of our work related to the chemical 6-PPD quinone, which has a severe impact on salmon species. And there's exciting research going on there that we're doing in conjunction with our sovereign tribal partners.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister McCabe, and we did it. So as expected, that went really quick, and so we do need to transition on, but I did want to thank all of our honorable panelists for being here today, even if it was for a short while, and as Chief Joseph said, good words do not last long unless they amount to something, so thank you for your leadership, your courage, and your desire to help move the needle in Indian country and makes this stuff mean something. So thank you, and this concludes the panel. Katsiao.
Please welcome Acting Secretary of the United States Department of Labor, Julie Su.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for having me. As the Acting Labor Secretary, I know a very fundamental truth, which is that good jobs change lives. And yesterday, I got to have several of you at the Department of Labor to talk about this. And I really appreciated not just the substance of our conversation, but the spirit of it. And I also got to host a panel that talked about how we are and need to be creating good jobs in Indian country and making sure that all communities, including those who've been left behind in the past when good jobs were available, get included. And in that panel, we heard from Cecile Bull Chief, who is a member of the Crow tribe in eastern Montana, who moved to Seattle. And through a registered apprenticeship, she became a glazier. A glazier is a worker who places glass in glass windows in buildings and indoors. And so even as she was learning the trade, because she was in an apprenticeship program, she was being paid while she learned. And she was paid double the minimum wage. And then after graduating from the program, Cecilia got a good job, a union job that allowed her to support her family as a single mother. As her kids grew up, Cecilia shared how she proudly pointed out all the buildings that she had worked on in the Seattle skyline. And today, Cecilia has 2 children who are painters, also in good union jobs, and she has 1 child, her youngest daughter, who is in college and studying pre-med. So I will say it again, good jobs change lives. And they do so not just for an individual and her family, but in an intergenerational way that builds intergenerational wealth and pride and opportunity. But at the same time, I have heard loudly and clearly from tribal leaders that for far too long, we have not done enough to create good opportunities and good jobs for members of tribal communities. And the US government cannot solve problems that we are not honest about. And so that's why one of the things that we say at the Department of Labor is we can't build equity if we are not clear-eyed about where there's been inequity. So one of the first things that I did when I came to the Department of Labor was to make sure that when we look at jobs numbers and unemployment numbers, that we do that in a way that is disaggregated for various communities, including the American Indian and Alaska Native community. So now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is really the agency that's the gold standard for data about what's happening in the labor market, the BLS issues monthly data on how American Indians and Alaska Natives are faring. And a recent analysis found that the community has lower labor force participation and higher rates of unemployment compared to the overall population. And the unemployment rate is higher in places like federal or state American Indian reservations compared to those who do not live in these communities. So, the Biden-Harris administration is serious about rewriting that narrative, about writing a new story. And we want each of you to help us in this new chapter. That means strengthening our workforce system and doing so together. So I think of our workforce system as infrastructure too. You've heard a lot about infrastructure here. The workforce system is also roads and bridges. It's the roads and bridges that connect people to the good jobs that they want and need, and employers to the people that they want and need. And you've already heard how the Biden-Harris administration is investing in infrastructure for Indian country, like new roads and bridges, like affordable high-speed internet, and making sure that clean water flows from every faucet. And now we need to make sure that our workforce infrastructure system is as strong as our physical roads and bridges, so that the jobs that we are creating are being created in Indian country, that those are good jobs, and that the community has access to those good jobs. That means that investing in proven models like registered apprenticeship programs, like Cecilia had. It also means programs that are training people for opportunities in their communities so that people don't have to leave their communities in order to get a good job. And if the workforce system is like infrastructure, registered apprenticeships are like superhighways. We're also working alongside tribes to better prepare Native youth for jobs in growing industries, because many of the jobs that we are talking about right now do not require a college degree. So as we do this, we are making sure that we recognize and respect tribal sovereignty in everything that we do. So with input from tribal leaders, we now have a policy that makes clear that for any action that affects federally recognized tribes, the Department of Labor will engage in government-to-government consultation. And we also have a new tribal consultation training course internally for all of the Department of Labor's staff who work directly with tribal nations or whose work affects policies that impact your communities. And finally, we have a newsletter that is directed at tribal communities to make sure that you are aware of things like funding opportunities and the technical assistance and support that we offer to make sure that you can access those opportunities. So if you are not already hearing from us, let me know, and I'll make sure that you get that newsletter. As President Biden says, a good job is about more than a paycheck. Good jobs bring dignity and respect. They sustain families, and they build strong communities today and for the future. So as we write this new story together, please know that the Department of Labor will be right by your side to fulfill the promise of bringing good jobs to every community. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you in the breakout session. Thank you so much.
In 20 or so minutes. Okay, great. Talk for 12.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have two speakers before we conclude our program for today. Following completion of the program, we'll proceed to our breakout sessions. Thank you for your patience.
I'll yell. There we go. Good thing I didn't yell when I turned the mic on. Just some logistics as we're waiting during the transition time. We have two more speakers who will be coming up, and then we will be transitioning to the breakout sessions. So just making sure that everyone knows. I think there might have been a little bit of confusion, but we have two more speakers, and then we're transitioning to the breakout sessions. Thanks.
You guys awake? It's been a long day, I know, and there's a lot of stuff we're throwing at you. But I want you guys to know, too, that we listen. Those of us working here in the administration, in the federal government, we listen to the tribal leaders on these panels. We also listen to you in our conversations on the side in the hallway. And in a little bit, we're going to listen to you in the breakout sessions. And I think Secretary Haaland noted this in her opening remarks, but last year after the summit, the first year under President Biden, we were virtual because of the pandemic. And last year we had the breakout sessions, and we know that, the way that just the format of the whole event, we heard some feedback about wanting to engage earlier on in the programming and directly with the president's cabinet members. And so when I was a tribal leader, I was not a tribal leader who was coming to Washington, D.C. every month for this or that. I was able to make one trip to Washington, D.C. each year, and I had to pack a lot in. And every minute had to count, right? And so we understand that. For so many of you, you're not here all the time. And when you're here, you're not always able to engage with the president's senior staff, members of his cabinet. And so President Biden and the vice president, worked to make sure that his cabinet members were here to hear directly from you. So we're going to have breakout sessions after this. They're concurrent. You see them on your agenda. And then we're going to have 2 other sets tomorrow. And you're not meeting with me or other folks that you might see more often, other folks you can call up. You're gonna have a chance to speak directly to people who make decisions for the president in this administration. And our ongoing commitment, which I hope is apparent by our actions, not just our words, that people are gonna listen. And so I really hope, I know it's been a long day, but I really hope that you take advantage of this time at the end of the day with these breakout sessions, because we're prepared to listen. And I know, on these panels, it's important to share some of the progress we've made to demonstrate, again, that we've listened. Also, it's information that you guys are really busy running your tribal governments and working at home, taking care of needs in your communities. We know that we say things a lot, we have to repeat ourselves, but we hope that this information we share in these panels is relevant. But most importantly, this is a summit between sovereigns and in a nation-to-nation relationship. And we're gonna do our part to hear you, to listen, and to do it in a way that brings decision makers to the table to hear you directly, not through the dedicated staff. I will say the teams at all the agencies are remarkable and committed, but it's important that they hear from you because of that respect. You all are elected or designated leaders of your tribal nations, and you deserve that seat at the table to speak directly with the leaders of the United States in our relationship with one another. And so we're gonna aim to do that. I know, for myself, speaking for myself, it isn't always comfortable to sit in these chairs all day long. So thank you, Miigwech, for doing that. And thank you for bearing with us. And we're gonna do our best to make it worth your while, those of you who've stayed and have some productive breakout sessions. And I think just, I'm a lawyer, I'm not so great at math, but given the math with 3 breakout sessions and 3 cabinet secretaries, you're gonna have a really good opportunity to have a chance to speak directly with some of the president's senior representatives in his government. So I also, while I'm here, wanna give just a special shout out. These events don't come together quickly or easily. They're a lot of work, just the logistics, to build the stage and the stands back there and the lighting. We had teams here over the last few days working past midnight so that this event and this setting is possible. And I would ask There are too many folks to name, but I would ask all of you to just give a round of applause to acknowledge and thank everybody involved in pulling this event together. Let them know that you appreciate them. So I'm going to quit hogging the mic and leave, and I look forward, please, if you see me in the hallway, pull me aside. I'm happy to listen and happy to try to help. But we'll get back to our programming, and I look forward to another day of this event. Miigwech, thank you.
Please welcome Secretary of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra.
Thank you and good afternoon. I hope you've had a good session so far. I hear the President was here, Vice President, a few of the secretaries. I hope that this has been fruitful for you, and I'm looking forward. I believe some of you will join me for a breakout session afterwards, so we'll have an opportunity to get more into some of these things. May I just say that I hope that you will encourage your colleagues to always come when the opportunity arises to Washington, D.C. We need to see you often. There are a number of issues that we're dealing with that impact you directly, and certainly those that are, for example, in the jurisdiction of HHS with regard to the Indian Health Services, immediate impact. And so we hope that you will always have an opportunity to come, voice your interests and concerns, but more than that, hear from us on the things that we're trying to do on behalf of Indian country overall. So to each and every one of you as leaders of tribal nations throughout this land, I want to say thank you for the time that you are spending with us today. I certainly believe that at HHS we have a lot to talk about with you. Certainly as the first department to actually gather an official committee to discuss affairs that are important to tribal nations through our secretarial-led Tribal Advisory Committee, which I believe is the gold standard and is now used by most of the departments in the President's cabinet to consult with tribal nations. I hope that those who are on our stack are able to share with you the work that we are doing. But let me just mention a few of the things that at HHS we continue to work on that I hope you will continue to be there with us to work on as well. And I hope during our breakout sessions we have a chance to go into these. I have to start with advanced appropriations in the budget process because, as you know, today, there was a very strong chance that today we wouldn't be meeting because we would have had a government that was shut down and we would not have the opportunity to be here. Fortunately, Congress did come up with a short-term solution. As you know, the continuing resolution that was signed takes us into January, February before we go through this entire exercise all over again. But had we shut down, we wouldn't be doing this with you because we wouldn't have the authority to stand up here and speak to you with a government that would have been shut down. We have fought since this president took office to not have programs like Indian Health Services, which services close to 2.5 million individuals from Indian country every year. Indian Health Services would have to shut down along with the federal government, regardless of the health severity of the people that they treat, because those monies that we get for Indian Health Services are discretionary dollars and therefore depend on Congress to pass a budget every year. So every time there's talk about a budget shutdown, it's not just a budget shutdown, it's a shutdown of healthcare services in Indian country. We have fought to convert the money that Indian Health Services gets from discretionary dollars to mandatory dollars, so that never again is there the consideration of shutting down health services for families in need simply because politics is going up on the Hill. We didn't quite get there last year, but what we did get what's called advanced appropriations, which means we get the money in advance, a year in advance, so that even if the government shuts down this month, we've got the money for Indian Health Services for the whole year. And we intend to continue that fight. Thank you. We intend to continue that fight. And so not once did we have to tell someone, we have to close the doors, we can't have your child come in and get health services from that doctor. And that's what we have to do. We hope that what we can do is establish that not only must we have the advanced appropriations, but we must have it be mandatory funding. So there's never a question. Just the way Medicaid receives its dollars, it doesn't worry about a political government shutdown. It gets its dollars. So should healthcare services that are done in our Indian Health Services centers. We did that. We've also broken ground on something that I think is almost as important, 13 new facilities, health facilities, that are now in the process of being built in Indian country to serve the people that you represent, that you're fighting for. Those 13 centers, health centers, I hope will be opening sooner than later so we can continue to provide expanded healthcare services. At HHS, we added 2 additional tribes to our IHS, Indian Health Services Tribal Self-Governance Program. So these are tribes, as you know, who are trying to do a lot of the work themselves and let their government decide. And we've just added a couple more. We're now up to about 380 tribes that are part of that program. We've invested more money. About $92 million is going to help increase the number of nurses in health services that are provided in Indian country. We're providing more money, several $million more for loan forgiveness for those who are going into health services in Indian country. We're going to continue to make those kinds of investments because the president has fought to secure some of those dollars in the budget to make that possible. We secured another $18 million, I think it was, for 988. I hope everyone is aware of 988. It is 911 for mental health services, substance use disorder support. If you or someone you know is going through a crisis, 988. Well, we have set up a distinct line that goes for those who are coming from Indian country so that they can get serviced directly by someone who will know how to best provide for their needs if they call 988. We pumped in some more money so we can try to expand those services on 988 for Indian country. We developed the first ever federal survey of native language vitality. I spoke about this sometime last year. To me, being able to not just retain, but to memorialize language is critical. And I know to many of you where that native language is disappearing, it becomes even more important when you're losing the people who can actually speak it fluently. And it's become very difficult to pass it on through generations. We have to fight to make sure that we keep that heritage. And so we are investing resources to help make sure that we never forget our roots. And I hope that you will help us ensure that that program is supported in Congress so we're able to continue to support your efforts to maintain that heritage. We've updated our tribal consultation policy. Oftentimes we'll hear, we heard about this too late, or you didn't include our tribe in the process. And so what we have done in consultation with members of our stack and other tribes as we meet with them is to try to expand our consultative process, listening to what you've said so we can make sure that whenever you all do meet with us, we're working based on a partnership with you on what needs to be done. And then I'll finally close by mentioning the $3.5 billion over the next 5 years that we will be investing in sanitation infrastructure in Indian country. That is to improve the water services, to make sure that what you are able to provide to the families that live in your nation will be safe, potable, and direct. And so those investments are now being made, about $700 million of that this coming year. We're going to need your help because that's the biggest investment Indian country has ever seen in that type of water infrastructure ever. And we got to make sure it's done right. And so please help us make sure that we've got the right contractors doing the work and that the development is going the way it's supposed to and that it's being used as quickly as possible to get that service up and running. Those are some of the things that we're working on. I was just fortunate to be not that long ago in South Dakota, and I had an opportunity to meet with a number of leaders in my stack committee. We had an opportunity to speak about any number of very important issues. It was interesting because when we were there in the land of the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, we learned something very important. There are communities that are being missed because they are so rural in nature. And while we have always worked, especially at IHS, in reaching out to communities and families in rural areas, we often miss some of the most important elements of what has to get done. Having brought virtually my entire team of leaders from HHS, from CDC, NIH, FDA, you name it, we had them there. And I'm not saying the subordinates, I'm saying the directors. We were able to have that communication directly with so many of the tribal leaders from across the country and certainly from our stack. We intend to use that consultative process and certainly our stack to make sure that we continue to do what we can to be there and meet the needs of Indian country. I could go on, but I'm going to stop because I know we were running a little late, and I'm going to have an opportunity at our breakout session to go into some of the details on these things. But what I hope you'll remember is that what we're doing, we're not doing because it feels good or because we're lucky we got some resource and we're not doing it out there. It's an obligation. We have an obligation that was put to us under the Constitution of the United States. And when I look at you, I'm not just looking at a community, I am looking at sovereign leaders. And it is my obligation under the laws and the Constitution of the United States of America to be responsive to a sovereign leader who under our Constitution has a standing of the United States of America. And so please recognize that what we do, we must do together. When we invest, we must invest together. When we fall, we will fall together. But if we do this right, when we pick ourselves up, not only will we do it together, but we will do it better. Thank you very much for having me. Look forward to seeing you at the breakout session.
Please welcome Secretary of the United States Department of Education, Miguel Cardona.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start off acknowledging some news that I learned just a few minutes ago. There was a shooting at the University of Las Vegas, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas school shooting. We don't have all the information. We know there are several victims. The Department of Education will be reaching out and we'll support the school the best way we can. I want to extend thoughts with that community and commit once again to doing everything we can to improve school safety, which is our #1 priority. And I know you will join me in saying a prayer tonight for the families in the community. I want to thank you for being here today and thank you for the warm welcome. And while I know Secretary Haaland could not be here in person, I know she's thrilled to host us once again at the Department of Interior. Secretary Haaland, I know you may be watching or you'll be watching later. She is truly an inspiration to the cabinet. And every time I have an opportunity to sit next to her or listen to her speak, I know the president made the best choice in Secretary for Interior, and she speaks with so much passion and respect for those who are on our lands and for our different tribes. It's truly an honor to work alongside her, and she's a special person. It's an honor to be here with so many tribal leaders, especially on the heels of Native American Heritage Month. I also want to recognize a dear colleague, Naomi Miguel, proud Res kid. Where is she? Stand up, please. Stand up. Naomi Miguel, a proud Res kid from Chui Chu Village on the Tohono O'odham Nation, who heads up our White House initiative on advancing educational equity, excellence, and economic opportunity for Native Americans and strengthening tribal colleges and universities. That is her title. It's a long title. Let's give her another round of applause. It's a long name, but let's face it. When it comes to supporting tribal sovereignty, strengthening the nation-to-nation relationship, revitalizing languages, and nurturing the full potential of Native American students, we have a long to-do list. We're fighting against the dark and ugly legacy of forced assimilation, discrimination, of trauma inflicted on indigenous peoples throughout our history. Not too long ago, those in power practiced appalling policies aimed at eradicating Native languages and Native cultures. Those policies were shameful. They were wrong. And we cannot deny that their impact persists to this day. There were once 245 indigenous languages spoken across our country, 245. 65% of those languages are now extinct, with dozens more at risk of disappearing forever. In my visits with tribal leaders and families, one thing that has been made clear: this is an existential threat, pure and simple. Your languages keep your cultural traditions and your identity alive. Because when a student becomes fluent in the language of their ancestors, they can breathe new life into traditions and support sovereignty of their tribe. At the Department of Education, we're working to raise the bar for multilingualism in this country, including preserving Native languages. We're a key player in the 10-year whole-of-government strategy to revitalize Native American languages and the Native Language Memorandum of Agreement. We've also launched the first ever National Native Language Resource Center. We're really proud of that, which includes 3 regional centers who will provide technical assistance for Native American languages in classrooms across the country. We must honor tribal consultation and educational sovereignty and fight for an education system where the ability to speak Native language is considered an asset, not a deficit. So today I want to say it loud and clear to all those who speak tribal languages. Your native language is your superpower. Your native culture is your superpower. And to help more students realize their superpowers, we're also creating new pathways into the teaching profession for more racially, culturally, and linguistically diverse and well-prepared educators. We know how powerful it is for students to see their own identity reflected in their teachers. Do we have any leaders with tribal colleges and universities in their communities? Yes? Good. Our TCUs drive the revitalization of Native languages and culture. I visited several tribal colleges and I've seen it firsthand. In fact, it was about a year ago when I visited Salish Kootenai College in Montana and experienced firsthand the spirit and pride and self-affirmation alive on that campus. I met students rejoicing in the opportunity to meaningfully connect with their cultures, in some cases for the very first time. I saw how it gave them more pride in their history and more confidence in their future, a greater resolve to give back for their community. It really built up their self-identity. You know, it's a powerful thing when students feel they can be themselves and be unapologetic about themselves and celebrate who they are and their identity. As a classroom teacher and school leader, when a student is confident in who they are, they do better. I'm proud this administration's historic support for TCUs at nearly $500 million, $474 million to be exact. That includes $190 million from the American Rescue Plan to help TCUs and their students recover from COVID-19, helping nearly 24,000 TCU students stay in school amid an unprecedented crisis. Can you imagine 24,000 TCU students having to leave school because of the pandemic? Well, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, that didn't happen. The Biden-Harris team will continue to push for even greater investments. A year ago, we secured $51.5 million for TCUs for 2023, an $8 million increase from 2022. And we're fighting for $53 million for fiscal year 2024. Before I conclude, I want to highlight another member of our Department of Education family who's here, Her name is Dr. Amy Lloyd. Amy, can you stand, please? You may know Amy. She's from the Zuni Pueblo tribe, and she leads our work on career, technical, and adult education. We have this opportunity in this country with the Invest in America dollars, whether it's the CHIPS and Science Act, the bipartisan infrastructure plan, or the climate provisions under the Inflation Reduction Act. We have an opportunity to fill millions of high-skill, high-paying careers. And we're changing how we're doing it. We're going to connect our high schools to our colleges, to our workforce partners. And Amy's leading that charge. Someone from the Zuni Pueblo tribe is leading that charge for the whole country. Last year, Amy heard from the Director of Education for the Coeur d'Alene tribe that I think government officials need to remember. She said, it's important that education is not something that's being done to us. We've heard that before. Because that was a reality for far too long. And in the Biden-Harris administration, we're working really hard to change that. In fact, we're the first administration to hold tribal consultation on the entire Department of Education budget. And to me, tribal consultation is more than just keeping the lines of communication open. It's also about making sure the needs of Native students, the vast majority of whom, you know, attend public schools, inform our entire Raise the Bar agenda, from including Native languages in our multilingualism efforts to transforming school-based mental health, to creating more pathways to family-sustaining careers, and so on. Simply put, I'm committed to the entire Department of Education being in service to our Native students. Together, let's ensure that tribal sovereignty also means educational sovereignty. Let's continue celebrating Native American cultures and supporting the use of Native American language. And let's make sure that every Native American student, parent, family, and community has a voice in shaping education for Native American students. Thank you, and I look forward to the conversation later.
We will now move into nation-to-nation talks with Secretary Cardona, Secretary Becerra, and Acting Secretary Sue. Please remember, the colored dot on your badge tells you where to go. A purple dot means you'll meet with HHS Secretary Becerra in the Bison Bistro. A yellow dot means you'll meet with Education Secretary Cardona in the library. And a red dot means you'll meet with Acting Secretary of Labor Sue in the Rachel Carson room next to the bistro. Ushers will be in the back of the auditorium and hallway to show you where to go.